country on internet and telephone services. Whilst Telstra adds additional little items and components to try and limit some of the electrical interference on high frequency, they certainly don't absolutely stop the high frequency interference and certainly the customer call dropouts. So I urge the committee to have a good look at areas on the...
Just in terms of frequency, obviously ADSL uses a particular frequency.
Correct.
VDSL and vectoring use a
higher frequency,
and therefore is
are more
susceptible.
prone. They are very much more prone to the interference of high frequency. And what is more important here, with the state of the Telstra copper network, in areas where there's high frequency and for ADSL and VDSL, they must work off a pair that has continuity between each. It's a continuity of the wire. In a lot of the cases now, because of the state of the Telstra copper network, workers have had to split the pair, so they have one pair from here and a pair from this group of wires, and they make that the pair to go to the customer. That then causes massive amounts of dropouts and faults across the copper network for those on ADSL and VDSL services. They must have a single paired service, and with the amount of damage and faults within the network today and the many cables that are damaged or failing, workers have had to split the pairs, and therefore ongoing problems, and that'll continue regardless of what network we put to the node if we remain the copper the way it is.
So with the high frequency interference, all it needs is a faulty roller door, the motor on the roller door playing up. That can drop out your ADSL. If you're in the bush, an electric fence. So, you know, most farmers have got electric fences. That sends a pulse. That can drop out the ADSL, VDSL if it goes to the right frequency, and it commonly occurs. And people in the bush will tell you when they're on their phone they can hear beep, 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 you know, just silently. So unless they change it and put fibre all the way, they're going to struggle, and they may never ever achieve it.
I'll never have it.
And faulty washing machines the same, send high frequency.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for your evidence today.
Thank you.
Do you want to get to that?
Is that
It's
the...
already there.
You got it?
Yes, thank you. I think it was part of your submission.
Thanks very much.
I'd now like to invite our final witnesses for today, representatives from the Australian Communications and Media Authority, to come to the table. Welcome. Could you please state your name for the Hansard record and the capacity in which you appear?
Maureen Carl, General Manager, Communications Infrastructure Division, the Australian Communications and Media Authority.
Giles Tanner, General Manager, Digital Economy Division.
Mr. Tanner.
Paul White, Executive Manager of NBN and Industry Monitoring Branch.
Welcome to you. Do you wish to make an opening statement before we go to questions?
No, Senator.
All right, thank you. Well, I invite questions from Senators. Senator Conroy.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you all again. Now, Senate estimates, the ACMA was asked about some questions about its role in relation to the regulation of the quality of fixed line services. In answer to questions about whether Telstra has been deferring network investments to make permanent access repairs, Mr Tanner said, there obviously has been some speculation around the meaning of problems that Telstra has been experiencing in its network performance. So if the issue goes to that issue, then we have a concern with it. Have you had a chance to follow up that question since estimate, Mr Giles? Mr Tanner?
Sorry, that wasn't one of the questions I took on notice. I might put that into a little bit of context. The one of the roles of the ACMA in that area is the monitoring and enforcement of the customer service guarantee benchmarks. Telstra's benchmark data for the last financial year had come in August or September from memory. The ACMA is currently considering its response to that data, which does show a couple of breaches by Telstra of benchmarks. And I was drawing a distinction, I believe, from memory between matters that might be of potential relevance to that consideration and matters that might not be. The situation I was in at estimates, which I'm still in today, is that as the ACMA is in effect conducting an investigation of that, I'd be loath to offer opinions about a range of issues that go to those breaches, their severity, potential mitigating factors, etc.
You were in the back of the room there, Mr Tanner, while that last presentation was on. I'm not sure if you could quite see the photos from the angle you were sitting, but you're nodding, so I'll indicate it. What's your reaction when you see that?
I guess the critical thing about the ACMA's role to get across is that our regulatory scheme is fundamentally concerned with the customer experience rather than with the underlying causes of the customer experience. The ACMA collects various statistics, Telstra publishes various statistics, we have certain enforcement powers. They are all concerned with or triggered by outcomes for consumers.
That looks fairly systemic. You have an overarching responsibility if there's a systemic problem, surely.
The ACMA doesn't actually have a charter to monitor or audit the state of the copper network. The ACMA has not done work on this, certainly in my memory in this area. So the ACMA doesn't have a view on that. I look at that with great interest, but
Just interest.
fundamentally our concern is with outcomes for consumers under the law that we administer.
But surely what you've witnessed there has an impact on an outcome for consumer.
If it has an impact for an outcome of consumer, it's going to register in the outcomes for consumers, and that will be of concern to us. If as a result of, if as a result
I just
of,
enjoyed the construction of that sentence. That was all I was laughing
sorry.
about, Mr Taylor.
If as a result of problems that Telstra's having with its network, whatever the cause of those problems may be, whether they be weather, whether they be the state of the copper, whether they be their staffing practices, if as a result of that they fall short of their customer service guarantee benchmarks or fall short of what they're required to do under the priority assistance scheme or any one of several other structures around them, then that's of great concern to us. We are charged with managing and regulating and giving some transparency around the outcomes or the effects of the way they run their network.
So under section 8.1d of the ACMA Act 2005, the ACMA's telecommunications functions include to report to and advise the Minister in relation to matters affecting consumers or proposed consumers of carriage services. Would that extend to advising about the sort of pictures you've just seen?
Well, that's a very wide remit,
I agree.
Senator.
So I'm asking, given that that is a wide remit, the sort of evidence you've seen before you, would you put your hands on your heart, Mr Tanner, and put your house on the line and say, buy the copper network?
I think certainly my view would be that there are other processes in other parts of government currently in play around the appropriate way forward with the NBN. The context of the regulatory scheme we administer, a lot of it goes back to 1997, where we were dealing with a totally different set of problems. Obviously, we were moving to full competition in fixed line services. And some of it, such as the CSG benchmarks, is the product of more recent activity. And I would say the context of that activity would be that there was an expectation that the copper network would be bypassed by fibre, but there was obviously a great level of concern, understandable level of concern that customers dependent on the fixed line service during that lengthy period of transition should not be dudded. So I guess that helps to explain the focus on.
Oh no, look, I understand that it wouldn't have been a
Outcomes
priority
for
while we were
consumers.
rolling out a fibre network and while we were closing down the copper network. So it wouldn't have been something. But
Yeah.
given that we're now going to potentially buy the network, I would have thought there would have been a heightened awareness. I'm not sure how early you got here and whether you heard the discussion we had with the department about them preparing a report without visiting a single home in Australia of the broadband availability. Have they included you and sought any information or data from you about fault levels so that they could feed that into perhaps making a judgment about, you've got real world experience from real Australians, real homes, real problems. Have they sought any information from you whatsoever?
Certainly, the department is well aware of the data that we maintain.
Oh, I appreciate you publish data. I'm
during
asking you
the-
as part of the broadband, what's the official name? The broadband...
Broadband constraint survey?
Yeah, broadband constraint survey. Have they asked you for any information?
In that context, no. I've certainly
So
shared
the
some
one
information,
organisation,
but I'm not aware
the
of
one
what the focus
organisation
was.
in the country that might actually, other than Telstra, be able to tell them where there are faults.
No.
They
Senator,
haven't sought.
let me be
information
careful.
from you.
Let me be careful. I have shared information with them.
How indiscreet of you, Mr. Tanner.
It's information that we maintain.
Do you wander
as
around
part
sharing
of our-
information with everybody without being asked?
We have a number of roles around transparency and outcomes for consumers with telecommunications.
Let's not
but I'm
dissemble.
not aware of the
Let's not
context
dissemble,
of that
Mr. Tanner. I
discussion.
asked you very specifically, had they sought information from your
In the
organisation,
context, no.
and you said no.
That's right.
Okay, don't try and
No, I'm
fluff it up.
pretty happy with that.
I repeat, the one organisation that actually knows where the faults are occurring, because by definition people phone and say, oh, I've got a problem. Let me put you on notice, Williamstown, Melbourne, Victoria, they haven't got any information from you. So
Actually,
thank you for that.
They don't generally phone us.
No, I appreciate they wouldn't. I'm not suggesting that
Yes.
it's your responsibility to, so please don't misunderstand. It's just you're a repository of actual real-world information, and they're doing a review of broadband constraints. I thought I naturally would have given you a call, had lunch, invited you out in the boat. Now, I've always been confused by this, even in my previous roles. I wanted to understand how you log differences between a voice fault and a data fault. Do you have a separate register? How does it work? Could someone explain that to me?
As a matter of fact, our obligations, which mainly date back to that 1997 period, are very much concerned with the voice service. The customer service guarantee, for example, is concerned with a telephony service, voice service. So we actually don't have a dimension around broadband.
So you don't record separately a data broadband fault as opposed to a voice fault?
Senator, no. Our data, in fact, does get reported by the telecommunications companies to us, and it's effectively voice based.
Okay. So, in terms of, do people contact you?
No, in most cases they would report their problems to their provider, and if they had a concern they would often or more than go to the TIO.
Okay, cool. So you don't really have a record of data, and I go back to the evidence you just heard from Mr. Murphy, who was explaining about how, and perhaps, and I know Mr. Tanney, this one is just for you. If you could help us understand the frequency question, copper, higher frequency, lower frequencies, what frequency does a voice work on, what difference does it make, and you might want to go slowly for me, the thickness of the copper, does the thickness of the copper interact then with the frequency for voice versus the frequency for ADSL versus the frequency for VDSL? I don't think you will ever have got a question like that in your life where people have said, go for it.
Senator, I don't think I'm your man to answer.
Oh, Mr. Tanner. I'm shattered.
I think you've
Get him back from Townsville now.
Yeah.
Get him off that island. Get him off Magnetic Island and get him back here. Surely you can help me with that. Come
we
on,
can certainly look.
He's on Magnetic Island. You can fly him back.
We're happy to take these questions on notice, but I did notice this morning that you weren't too happy with taking questions on notice. But we're very happy to give you an answer on that. Okay?
Happy to take it on notice, but I've got to say, Mr. Tanner, that is the first time in nearly 18 years at the estimates table I've seen you not able to answer a question.
I came in here all ready to discuss the combinatorial clock auction centre. It just never comes up.
Do you have any information gathering powers, and if so, could you describe them?
Yes, we do. In particular, well, we have a wide range of powers to request information when we're conducting an investigation, but I guess in this area of particular relevance is the network reliability framework structure, where we actually collect a range of statistics about the outcomes for consumers of the telephony network, and those, or excerpts from those, are actually published annually, including with time series data in our communications report, which is all in the public domain. So a number of those statistics too, the telcos themselves are required to publish. So, for example, a fair bit of the raw data, the monthly data, is published directly by Telstra itself on its performance. And there's a number of matters on which they're required to report, which we're happy to take you through if that's helpful.
So have you inquired of Telstra what records they have in relation to outstanding investments required to permanently repair faults? Do you, sort of looking at it from the systemic issue, which you've seen there, and I mean, I was, like you, Senator Ludlam, shocked to hear Mr Murphy describe 70% of pits possibly have problems like that. I mean, that sounds like a systemic fault issue across the network. Have you...
Sure. Once again, very much our focus is on consumer outcomes. I'll give you some examples. Under level 1 of the National Reliability Framework, we're getting information on the percentage of CSG standard services that did not experience a fault during the month reported. And there's a statistic on the percentage of time in a month that CSG standard service on average are available.
Was that time of the month?
The percentage of time in a month that they're available.
Yeah.
Level C, level 1C, is the average time in hours for fault-affected CSG standard services to be repaired for the month. Now, we actually publish annual grossed up Australia-wide figures for that as a time, for those figures as a time series in this communications report.
Can you break them out seasonally? I don't expect you to have that at the table. How difficult would it be to break them out seasonally? Because Telstra are telling people
what
that...
we've published with 1A and B performance, which is just a national figure for those first two that I mentioned, is actually, we've published it on a quarterly basis, and indeed there is a visible seasonal pulse in the NRF level 1A data, which is the percentage of CSG standard services that did not experience a fault. Right. You could see a definite pattern in which the faults tend to...
it's higher in winter, right?
It tends to be the first quarter of the calendar year when it tends to dip in performance.
Yeah.
And that largely reflects performance in northern parts of Australia for various weather conditions.
Through the monsoon. Does it swing the other way for southern capitals?
We haven't got disaggregation reported on, and there is certainly a similar level of seasonality in a lot of the local data that's reported.
The point is you could see an annual pulse in it fairly clearly.
Yeah, you can.
It's fairly crude stuff because it's an Australia-wide statistic.
What about something with a longer lead time? One of the comments that the previous witnesses made very strongly was that pre-privatisation, the maintenance of the network was of a much higher standard. Are the statistics that you're quoting there able to be consistently benchmarked against something if we take us back to 1996, for example?
Yes, the last report went back to at least 2007, and we have got data and early reports going back to previous periods. I think the Network Reliability Framework came in, I think, around 2006 or so from memory as a measure, but we have got time series back to the when it started.
You do, okay. And that it would be a consistent underlying metric. We'd be comparing apples with apples.
That's correct.
Now, I appreciate that technology has moved on, but the legislation Does it restrict you to only examining voice?
The ACMA...
It does say fixed line service, I think I read out before.
The ACMA collects these statistics based on this quite old remit. I certainly accept what you were making earlier. The ACMA has a fairly wide power to investigate and look into matters if it wishes, but the statistics we've actually been collecting are these ones under the National Reliability Framework.
So would you be able to collect statistics from Telstra on data faults?
We have a wide range of powers to obtain information from Telstra.
And so if the government, if I was the government and I was proposing to buy the network, I would have thought you could give a fairly reasonable first-hand bit of advice to them if you collected information on data faults as opposed to just voice. I mean, it might seem to me like good governance, you know, a smart idea to get the guys who've got the powers under an act to inquire about the fault levels for data, because it's being bought as a broadband service, not as a voice service. So we will, I promise you, get to talking to them about how they're going to maintain a voice service at the same time. But it just seems odd that the government haven't asked you for any information directly about the level of faults, and they haven't asked you to use your powers to collect information so they can make a judgment about the level of faults across the network. But it's more of a rhetorical question, I suspect, Mr. Tanner, than one you probably want to answer. That's about all from me, Senator Ludlam. Could I say thank you? Senator Ludlam?
Senator Ludlam, have you got any questions? No? Senator Thorpe? No. Well, thank you very much for appearing today before the committee. I'd like to thank all witnesses who have contributed to today's hearing, and this committee now formally stands adjourned.